Right, so today I want to make a video on this story, and it was originally put out by CTV and CBC, and then I got this response up here that I thought was pretty good. But CTV and CBC both put out this story that hiking carbon tax to $210, I believe it's a ton, it's the cheapest way to hit climate targets. And this is an issue that we really need to talk about because it's a big issue and it's costing people a lot of money. And I think it's an issue that I think is very personal for a lot of people because people, especially in Alberta, are struggling to get by, and the carbon tax is money out of your pocket. So basically, I'm just going to go over the tweet and then talk a little bit. At the gas pump, this works out to around 44 cents more per liter, which is on top of the number it already is, which I think is 10 to 20 cents. I'm not sure exactly. I know it's at least 10 cents. But for a 70-liter vehicle that with just one weekly fill up, that's $1,560 per year. Weird how the carbon tax crowd wasn't talking about this during the election we just had. And the first thing I would point out is that most families have two vehicles because the economy is so bad and because the government has created policies that have forced families that two people have to work. Um, Not that if two people want to work, I think that's a bad thing, but in the past, you could afford to get by on one income, and the government has destroyed that luxury. So now we have to have two, and I think that's very sad because it would be a lot nicer to do it the old-fashioned way. And like I say, not that if the wife, usually the wife or the girlfriend wants to work, then they shouldn't. But I don't understand why, if you can have one income, why you wouldn't want that. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me, but it's kind of a tangent. So back to the issue. He also says, weird how the carbon tax crowd wasn't talking about this during the election we just had. And it's something that, like, I don't understand. Like, the problem is that all these people that go on and on and on about the carbon tax and climate change and how it's real and the climate deniers are such a big issue and all this stuff, but yet if you were right about climate change, you shouldn't be afraid to do what is necessary to fix it. Like, it makes no sense. Like, if you think climate change, like, if climate change was definitively true, then no one other than people who are insane wouldn't want a carbon tax to, or I mean, to fix it in a way, not the carbon tax. I kind of misspoke. No one in the right mind wouldn't want to do what is necessary to fix climate change if humans were causing it. Now, it's number one, it's completely debatable whether or not humans are actually contributing amount that's significant. And contrary to what a lot of people believe, the science doesn't say that humans aren't contributing in a significant amount. And even if humans are, like, the problem with the climate change crowd is you have to answer yes to a few questions before you can go as far as they want to go. And the problem is that after the first question, you're already wrong. And even if you're right on that one, you'd have to get two or three more right. But first question being is, are humans causing it enough to that it's an issue? The answer to that is no. But if it's a yes, is a carbon tax the best way of doing it? And since the government of Canada makes, I think, about $600 million a year extra tax revenue off things like the carbon tax, I think it's pretty safe to say that the carbon tax is just a tax grab. You also have the AOC crowds of the world who have basically admitted that the Green New Deal, which is like the gold standard for the climate change people, um, the person one of the people who headed it up admitted that it's just about implementing socialism or more socialist policies. So you have a government of the government of Canada that by implementing a carbon tax can tax people a lot more, can have a lot more government intervention in our day-to-day lives through regulations and whatnot. So when you have people admitting that it's for socialism, and you have the government of Canada, because their solution to climate change is more government power, i.e., socialism, more regulation, i.e., socialism, I think it's safe to say that their solutions to it are very little to do with fixing climate change. So those are the two big ones. And I mean, the question in general would be, if you believe that it's such a big issue, then what makes you think the government can fix the problem? like especially a leftist government. Like I mentioned before, and I always keep mentioning in these videos, is that in California, there's Democrats at every level of government. If Democrats want to pass something, they can pass it without question. There'll be no opposition to it. And yet, in California, there are two major cities, San Francisco or two of the major cities, San Francisco and Los Angeles, have two of the biggest homelessness problems in the country. Crime is through the roof. And yet, Democrats could pass any policy they want. And the problem is only getting worse, if anything. In Baltimore, it's the same thing, Democrats. Detroit, same thing, Democrats. Chicago, same thing, Democrats. So why, like, it makes no sense. If you think that it's such a big problem, the government can't solve day-to-day life problems. Like, they can't do it because there's no incentive for them to do it. Because if they solve it, well, then why would we need the government anymore? Because the problem's fixed. Like, the problem is that not enough people are smart enough to put two and two together. Partially because a lot of people are just dumb to begin with. I would say that's the minority, though. Partially because the brainwashing. I would say about probably 80 to 90% of the people that don't get this kind of stuff, it's just because brainwashing, and because it's socially acceptable to fall into the brainwashing, so they don't want to question it. And I know a lot of people who are, it's socially acceptable to have the PC beliefs, even though when you talk to them in private, all of a sudden they open up a little and they're like, yeah, I think a lot of that stuff's actually bullshit. But and you see this a lot, like. I listen to a lot of YouTube channels, people on Twitter that aren't on the right, and the amount of people that I've heard that talk, and when it comes to Trump, because a lot of them are American, but even the odd Canadian, that talk about how, I don't think Trump's really that bad, and like these are centrist people on the left and all this kind of stuff, like. All this you even had Obama come out, I think it was fairly recently actually, and said, yeah, the left is going too far to the left. Like Trump is going to win this next election because you guys are going too far to the left. And you try talking to these diehard leftists about it, and it's in one ear and out the other. Like you could tell them that gravity exists, and they would tell you, Donald Trump thinks gravity exists, and they would tell you it doesn't. Like that's the level we're at. And I mean they'll shoot back and say the same thing about the right, but no one objectively would say that it's on a level playing field. Like, yeah, the right is partisan, but it's not nearly the same. Like, of all the centrist people that I listen to, not one of them agrees with the left on that. Not one of them. I even have centrist people that I follow who've never voted conservative or Republican, vote Democrat, at least in the primaries, and they are. You'd think that they're a conservative the way they talk, but they're not, because the thing about the political divide, and again, people talk about this political divide nowadays and what's causing it. Well, you've had the right, who's if anything came a little bit to the left, which I think objectively you can't argue against that. They've came a little bit to the left over the past generation or so, and you've had the left that's gone way to the left. And the best way of putting this is that studies show that the average Democrat has gone or if you look at Democrats in 2008 and Republicans in 2008 and compare them to Democrats now in 2016 and Democrats now and Republicans now, that there's more of a gap between Democrats in 2008 and Democrats now than there is between Democrats in 2008 and Republicans in 2008. That's how far to the left that the average leftist has gone. And the problem is people need to understand this, because people think that this political divide exists because both sides have their issues. Well, yeah, that's true, but one side has gone way off the deep end and we're not talking about it. And that's what's, and to tie it all back together to this carbon tax thing, is that costing the I mean, let's just round it up too, because costing the average person $2,000 more a year because the carbon tax is already at least 10 cents. I mean, I know the problem. I mean, I know Alberta has one of the lowest carbon taxes because a lot of I know BC has a bigger one. I don't know about the eastern provinces. I don't follow them quite as close, but let's just say 2,000 because I think it's safe to round it up to that. even 17, 1800 would be if you had that extra 10 cents, because you know whatever 44 divided by 55, whatever that percentage would be. But that much extra money would be huge. Like, imagine if you could have $2,000 extra per year. Like that's the difference between, if you're a person under like 30 or 40, that's the difference between able to retire like way a year or two earlier. That's the difference between being able to go on a nice holiday that much earlier, to be able to, I mean, that's not far off college tuition for a year, unless you're going to a really expensive school. At least my tuition wasn't that far off that. So it makes no sense. And the problem is that the carbon tax objectively doesn't work. BC has had a carbon tax for, I think, 10 or 11 years now, hasn't lowered carbon emissions. And the problem is that they lie to you, in that they claim that the Paris Accord is going to fix the climate change, and it isn't. It isn't. I would bet, because, I mean, for the main reason that China and India aren't going to follow any of the climate change goals, and China and India cause the majority of the world's CO2. So whatever they do defines the world, basically. It doesn't matter what, like I've defined it, like I've put it before. People in Canada, namely Justin Trudeau, believe that reducing Canada's CO2 levels by 10 or 20%, when we're only 1% of the world's CO2, or we emit at 1% of the world's CO2, is going to make a difference. When, number one, CO2 is only 20% of the Earth's atmosphere, of the Earth's greenhouse gases. So 1%, or let's just say the carbon tax is going to reduce our CO2 by 20%. I think that's a generous amount. So it's going to reduce, and like I say, BC hasn't reduced it at all, but let's just say it's going to reduce it 20%. Let's be extremely generous. It's going to reduce 20% of 1% of 20%. Like, that's, like, how many decimals would be in that number? Like, multiply 10% or 20% by 1% by 20%. Like, do you know how small of a number that is? Like, are you honestly telling me that, like, less than 0.1% is actually going to make a difference? Like, how crazy are you guys? And the problem is that, like I said, they lie to you. Like, they make it seem like it's just this little slight inconvenience, but it's $2,000 a year. Like, that's a ton of money. Like, the left constantly berates, people on the right, that they don't know that they don't care about the poor and the working class, even though they're the ones making the poor and the working class mainly, their lives $1,500 a year more expensive. Like, are you crazy? And for something that objectively doesn't work. That's the one thing that really bothers me about the left, is that they think that if you disagree with them slightly, then it must mean that you disagree with them on everything. And like they're not smart enough to recognize that you can disagree with them on the carbon tax, but still believe in climate change and still believe that we need to do things to reduce it. The problem is they don't. They're not smart enough to put two and two together, or they're just so brainwashed they can't even comprehend that someone could disagree with them logically. Like, that's the thing about the left, is that they can't comprehend that people can disagree with them and not have the most nefarious intentions possible. And it's something that really, really bothers me, and I think it should bother more people, because this is a big issue and it makes no sense. And the other thing too is that the people on the left that believe in this kind of stuff, they just talk a big game. They don't actually believe what they're talking about. I've seen studies, and I might have even made a video about it, but I mean, you can look this up. People who self-identify as climate skeptics are more likely to recycle than people who believe in climate change. But yet, recycling is a very important thing to do, because I mean, it's mainly the third world that causes it. But the left, garbage in the ocean is a big issue. Garbage just in general is a big issue. All this kind of stuff. So if you actually believe in this kind of stuff, put your money where your mouth is. Stop lecturing other people. And it bothers a lot of people. And yet the problem is that a lot of people, the big difference, another big difference in the whole political divide, is that people on the left, especially the far left, tend to be a lot more likely to make their voice heard than people on the right. Even the far right. But I mean, the far right is just, a leftist fantasy that largely is a non-issue, basically. And like I said, the political poll that I just cited kind of proves that. But which is why that people tend to side with them, because they think it's the social norm, and why the far leftists tend to believe that the majority of people agree with them, which they don't. Like I said, the majority of people do think climate change is a thing, but that's because all the propaganda that's pumped out there. If a third of Canadians don't believe in climate change, when you have people who literally are advocating putting them in jail, namely Bill Nye, for having that opinion, then are you honestly telling me that if the government said, if the official position of the government and the mainstream media was, yeah, we're not sure if climate change is a thing or not, the jury's still out, the majority of people would agree with you? I would bet every dollar I have that the majority of people wouldn't believe in climate change if the official position was, we're not sure. I would be confident as possible in making that bet. But anyways, basically to sum up the video, the climate change carbon tax crowd are lying and manipulating people, because they know that if they told people this, that it would make them look bad and they would be less likely to get elected. But the problem is that if you're right, if you're morally right and you're factually right, then there's no reason to lie to people, because if you're right, then like, why would you lie? It makes no sense. So basically, long story short, the government is going to push this too. Like, if you think that the Trudeau government's not going to try and jack up the carbon tax, you're wrong. So the one thing you can do is, number one, support your provincial governments, namely Alberta, Saskatchewan, that are, I mean, I think Ontario's doing it too, that are going after the carbon tax, that are fighting it. Write your federal constituents, provincial constituents. Talk to people too. I mean, I know we got the holidays coming up, that people are so scared to talk about politics that, like, I don't get it. I mean, I understand why. Is that people on the left's beliefs are shrouded in nothing, and it's all emotion. And the problem is that whenever you try to have a debate, it gets all emotional. It usually gets blamed on the person who, not the person who gets overly emotional, the other way around. So that's kind of my position on politics, talking with family and friends. But usually, friends usually you have similar politics, so that's not usually the thing. It's usually family. But at least in my experiences, and from a logical perspective too, like, not many full-on socialists are going to be friends with free market capitalists. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So, but family members can deviate pretty drastically. So basically, I've talked quite a while in this video. Take-home point being, the carbon tax climate change crowd continues to lie and manipulate to people, and one of the big reasons for the political divide, like I talk about, is that we have one side who isn't being honest with the other side. And we know this because the left always projects on the right that they're liars, they're not being honest, they're manipulating us. Like with Trump, is you can always see that they think everything he says, they think he's lying. He could say that on a sunny day that it's sunny out, and they would think that he's lying. And they're not, because like I've said before, people who have no idea what they're talking about tend to just project their own belief systems on other people, and the left continuing to accuse the right of lying about everything, when the left is clearly lying about this issue, like clearly lying, at the very least manipulating people. So I mean, stop doing it. And a lot of this is probably just preaching to the choir, but we need to fix this kind of stuff, because this is costing a lot of people a lot of money, but namely people in Alberta. And if you're tired of it, which I know a lot of people are, you need to make your voice heard. And if you're doing it, continue to do it, and stop being afraid too. Like, you're not, in my mind at least, you're not really losing anything by talking with people about this, even if they disagree with you. And so basically, I'm going to leave it there. If you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.